The morning light filtered through the silk curtains of the bridal suite at the Grand Meridian Hotel, painting everything in shades of gold and ivory. Maya Chen stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection almost unrecognizable beneath layers of expensive lace and crystal beading. The wedding dress had cost more than her mother's annual salary, a fact that still made her stomach twist with a mixture of guilt and wonder. "You look like a princess," whispered Sofia Martinez, Maya's best friend since childhood, as she adjusted the cathedral-length veil. Sofia's eyes glistened with tears, though Maya couldn't quite read the emotion behind them. "Alexander is the luckiest man alive." Maya smiled, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety in her chest. Alexander Rothwell III, billionaire tech mogul, philanthropist, and apparently her salvation. They'd met 18 months ago at a charity gala where Maya had been working as a catering assistant, struggling to pay off her father's medical debts while putting herself through business school at night. Alexander had been magnetic, confident, sweeping her off her feet with private jets, intimate dinners overlooking the city, and promises of a life she'd never dared to dream of. 5 hours, Maya whispered to her reflection. 5 hours until I become Mrs. Rothwell. Her phone buzzed on the vanity table. Alexander's name flashed across the screen with a message. "Can't wait to see you at the altar. Everything is perfect, perfect." The word echoed in her mind as Sofia excused herself to check on the flower arrangements. Maya sat down, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to happen. 300 guests, including senators, tech industry titans, and international celebrities. The wedding had been featured in Vogue, Forbes, and every society column in the city. Alexander's PR team had orchestrated every detail with military precision. She picked up her phone, intending to respond to Alexander's message, when she noticed something odd. His message thread was open, but above it was another conversation, one that appeared to be still active. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She shouldn't look. It was probably just business. Last-minute details about the merger everyone kept, mentioning at dinner parties, but something made her tap the screen. The thread was between Alexander and Sofia. Maya's blood turned to ice as she read the most recent messages. "Sent just minutes ago, Alexander. Almost there. Once we're married, the Tanaka deal closes. My father's board finally backs off and we're golden. You've played your part perfectly. Sofia. She has no idea, does she? God, Alex, sometimes I feel bad. She really thinks you love her. Alexander. Don't get sentimental now. You're getting your boutique agency. I'm getting my inheritance unlocked and the company merger. Maya gets a nice life. Everyone wins. It's just business, baby. Besides, after a respectable year or so, we can arrange a quiet divorce. She'll walk away with a settlement and her pride intact. Maybe. Sofia. And we can finally stop sneaking around. I'm tired of pretending to be happy for her when I should be the one wearing that ring. That dress. That life, Alexander. Patience. By tonight, everything changes. The Tanaka Corporation won't finalize their partnership unless I present the image of stability. A wife, a family man. Maya's background story is perfect. Rags to riches, the billionaire's good deed. The press eats it up. Stock prices are already climbing on speculation alone. Sofia. She's calling for me. I have to go play best friend again. This is the last time, right? After today, I don't have to pretend anymore. Alexander. After today, you'll have everything you want. I promise, now go. Make sure she gets down that aisle on time. We have $2 billion riding on this fairy tale. Maya's hands shook so violently that she nearly dropped the phone. The room spun around her, the beautiful cream walls closing in like a cage. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps as the truth crashed over her in waves. The romantic gestures, the quick proposal, the insistence on a grand public wedding. The way Alexander's business associates always seemed more interested in discussing corporate strategy than getting to know her. It had all been a performance, a carefully choreographed illusion. And Sofia, her best friend since they were 8 years old, the person who had held her hand through her father's death, who had celebrated every small victory with her, had been sleeping with her fiancé, conspiring with him, lying to her face while helping her pick out wedding favors and addressing invitations. The door opened and Sofia walked back in, her smile bright and false. The photographer is ready for some getting ready shots. Are you, Maya? What's wrong? You look pale. Maya stood slowly, her mind racing through options, through possibilities, through the burning need for either flight or vengeance. She could run. She should run. Pack her things, disappear, start over somewhere far away from these beautiful, poisonous people. But then she looked at Sophia's concerned face, so perfectly constructed, so expertly deceptive, and something hardened inside her chest. They had made her part of their game without her consent. They had stolen 18 months of her life, manipulated her grief and her dreams, turned her into a pawn in their corporate chess match. If they wanted a performance, she would give them one they'd never forget. "I'm fine," Maya said, her voice steady despite the inferno raging inside her. "Just nervous." "Wedding jitters." Sophia's relief was palpable. "That's completely normal. Come on, let's get you married." Maya smiled, cold and calculating. "Yes," she said softly. "Let's." The cathedral was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, its soaring ceilings and stained glass windows creating an atmosphere of sacred grandeur. 300 guests filled the pews, their designer clothes and expensive jewelry glittering in the filtered sunlight. News cameras lined the back of the church. Alexander's PR team had secured exclusive rights to document the wedding of the century. Maya stood in the bridal antechamber, her father's old pocket watch clutched in her hand. He'd carried it through 40 years of construction work, and it was one of the few possessions she had left of him. She pressed it to her heart, drawing strength from the memory of his calloused hands and honest smile. 5 minutes, whispered the wedding coordinator, a brittle woman named Constance who had spent the last 6 months treating Maya like an inconvenient obstacle to her perfect vision. Through the crack in the door, Maya could see Alexander standing at the altar, devastatingly handsome in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He was laughing with his groomsmen, completely at ease, confident in his deception. Sophia stood among the bridesmaids in her pale pink silk dress, her face the picture of supportive friendship. They had no idea what was coming. Maya had spent the last 4 hours in careful preparation. While Sophia had been distracted with last-minute details, Maya had forwarded the incriminating text thread to her own email, backed it up to 3 cloud services, and sent copies to her lawyer, a public defender she'd befriended during her community college days who now owed her a favor. She'd also composed a detailed message, scheduled to send to a carefully curated list of reporters, business journalists, and Alexander's board members in exactly 30 minutes, but first, she needed to look him in the eye. The music swelled, Pachelbel's canon, because Alexander had insisted on tradition. The doors opened and Maya began her walk down the aisle alone. Her mother had passed when she was young and her father 2 years ago. She'd told Alexander she wanted to walk herself, a symbol of her independence. He'd found it charming, good for the narrative of the self-made woman he was generously elevating. Now that independence would be her weapon. Every step down that aisle felt like a mile. Guests turned to admire her dress, to smile at the beautiful bride. She saw Alexander's father in the front row, the stern patriarch whose approval Alexander had spent his entire life chasing. She saw the Tanaka Corporation executives, flown in from Tokyo specifically for this merger sealing ceremony. She saw society matrons and tech industry leaders, all waiting to witness what they thought was a romantic union. Maya's eyes never left Alexander's face. She watched his confident smile, the way he straightened his shoulders, the subtle nod he gave his father. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of months of manipulation. She reached the altar and Alexander extended his hand. His grip was warm, familiar. For a moment, just a fleeting second, she felt the weight of what could have been. In a different world, with different circumstances, maybe some version of this could have been real, but this wasn't that world. The officiant, a white-haired bishop who'd probably been paid a fortune for his services, began the ceremony. His voice boomed through the cathedral, speaking of love and commitment, of sacred bonds and eternal devotion. Maya barely heard the words. She was watching Sophia, whose eyes kept darting between her and Alexander, a slight frown creasing her forehead. Something was off. Sophia could sense it. "If anyone has any objection to this union," the bishop intoned, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The cathedral fell silent. This was meant to be a formality, a theatrical pause before the final vows. Maya took a deep breath and turned to face the congregation. "I do," she said clearly. A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. The bishop blinked in bewilderment. Alexander's hand tightened on hers, his smile frozen in place. Maya, he whispered urgently. What are you? She pulled her hand free and stepped to the center of the altar, addressing the assembled guests. Her voice, strengthened by years of late-night presentations in business school and early morning shifts rallying catering teams, carried to every corner of the cathedral. I object to this wedding, she announced, because it's based on a lie. The silence deepened, became absolute. 300 people held their collective breath. Alexander's face paled. Maya, you're having cold feet. Let's step outside and— No, she cut him off, her voice like steel. We're not stepping outside. These people came here for a show and I'm going to give them one. They came here believing they were witnessing a love story. The billionaire and the girl from nowhere. A modern fairy tale. She turned to look at Alexander directly, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. But this isn't a love story, Maya continued. This is a business transaction. A carefully orchestrated merger facilitated by a fake engagement to a man who never loved me, who only needed me to unlock his inheritance and secure his corporate partnerships. Gasps erupted from the pews. Phones came out. The cameras at the back of the church swiveled, their red recording lights suddenly seeming ominous. Maya, you're being hysterical, Alexander said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The stress of the wedding has— I found your messages, Maya said simply. All of them. Your discussions about the Tanaka merger, your promises to Sophia, your plans for a quiet divorce after a respectable year or so. Sophia had gone white as a sheet. She took a step backward, nearly stumbling over her own feet. Maya pulled her phone from where she'd hidden it in a pocket carefully sewn into her dress, an addition the seamstress had found odd but accommodated. She held it up, the screen displaying the text thread in large, clear letters. It's just business, baby. Everyone wins. Maya gets a nice life. She'll walk away with a settlement and her pride intact, maybe. Maya's voice didn't waver as she read Alexander's own words back to him. That's what you said about me, about our marriage, about the 18 months of my life you stole. Alexander lunged for the phone, but Maya danced backward, and suddenly his groomsmen were uncertain whether to help restrain the bride or their friend. The moment of chaos spoke volumes. The truth, Maya said, her voice rising, is that I was never a bride. I was a prop, a piece of set dressing in Alexander Rothwell's carefully staged production. My poverty was aesthetic. My grief was narrative. My love was a line item in a business plan. She turned to the Tanaka executives who sat rigid in their seats. Mr. Tanaka, you should know that the man you're about to entrust with billions of dollars considers this kind of deception standard business practice. What he did to me, he'll do to you. Then she looked at Alexander's father, whose face had turned a dangerous shade of red. And Mr. Rothwell Sr., your son passed every test you set for him except the most important one, being an honest man. Finally, she faced the congregation again. I came here today believing in love. I came here thinking I was lucky, grateful, blessed. But the truth is, I was always worth more than this. I was always worth honesty. I was always worth being chosen for who I am, not for how I could be used. Maya walked to where Sophia stood frozen among the bridesmaids. And you, she said softly. I loved you like a sister. That was real, at least from my side. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but Maya didn't care anymore. She turned back to Alexander one final time. The bishop had retreated, the groomsmen had backed away, and Alexander stood alone at the altar, his perfect day crumbling around him. So when you ask me, Alexander Rothwell, if I take you to be my lawfully wedded husband, my answer is this: I do not belong to you. I never did, and I never will. The cathedral erupted. Voices shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Guests stood from their pews in confusion and excitement. Maya didn't wait to see Alexander's reaction. She gathered her skirts, held her head high, and walked back down the aisle, this time as a woman who had saved herself. The viral video hit social media within minutes. Billionaire bride and Rothwell exposed trended worldwide within an hour. By sunset, Maya's altar revelation had been viewed 60 million times across various platforms. Maya watched it all unfold from a modest hotel room. Across town, nothing like the luxury suites she'd grown accustomed to during her time with Alexander, but paid for with her own credit card under her own name. She'd changed out of the wedding dress, carefully folding it away, She'd sell it later, donate the money to a women's shelter. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from reporters, messages from former classmates she hadn't spoken to in years, and dozens of contact attempts from numbers she didn't recognize. She ignored them all except for one, her lawyer, Janet Kim. "Maya, we need to talk about your next steps." Janet's voice was both excited and cautious. "What you did today was extraordinary, but Alexander Rothwell has an army of lawyers and PR professionals. They're already spinning this as a mental breakdown, claiming you were overwhelmed by the transition from poverty to wealth." Maya had expected as much. "What about the text messages?" "That's where it gets interesting. I've already been contacted by 3 investigative journalists who want to verify the authenticity of those messages. If we can prove they're legitimate, and I believe we can, Alexander's public image is destroyed. But more importantly, several of his business partners are now demanding audits and reviews of their contracts. The Tanaka Corporation released a statement an hour ago suspending their merger discussions, pending an investigation into Alexander's business practices. A grim satisfaction settled in Maya's chest. "Good. There's more," Janet continued. "I've had my team digging through the prenuptial agreement Alexander had you sign. Maya, did you read it carefully?" "His lawyers said it was standard. Protection for both parties." Janet's laugh was sharp. "Standard for him, maybe." "The agreement included a clause stating that if the marriage ended for any reason within the first 5 years, you'd receive nothing beyond what you brought into the marriage, which, given your financial situation, was essentially nothing. But if you terminated the engagement before the ceremony, you'd owe him damages for reputational harm and business losses. They had you trapped." Maya's hands clenched. "So if I just left this morning, you'd be facing a lawsuit you couldn't afford to fight. By going through with the ceremony, or starting to, and exposing him publicly with evidence, you've actually protected yourself. His fraud negates the prenup. In fact, we might have grounds to sue him for emotional distress and fraudulent inducement." "I don't want his money," Maya said quietly. "I just want him to never be able to do this to anyone else." "Noble but impractical," Janet replied. "Maya, you need resources to rebuild your life. Let me at least negotiate a settlement that covers your living expenses while you get back on your feet." Over the next few days, Maya lived in a strange twilight zone. She couldn't go outside without being recognized, couldn't open social media without seeing her face everywhere. The public reaction was split. Some praised her courage, others called her a gold digger who got cold feet. Alexander's PR machine worked overtime to paint her as unstable, opportunistic, a woman who had deliberately sabotaged a good man's happiness. But then the cracks in Alexander's armor began to show. A former employee of Rothwell Industries came forward with allegations of manipulated stock prices. Another ex-girlfriend gave an interview describing a similar pattern. Alexander pursuing her intensely, making promises, then disappearing once he'd secured a business deal through her family connections. Financial journalists started examining his company's books more closely, finding irregularities and questionable practices. Most damaging of all, Sophia broke her silence. Maya was lying on the hotel bed trying to focus on a book when her phone buzzed with a news alert. "Maid of honor confirms billionaire's deception. I'm sorry," says former best friend. Maya's heart hammered as she clicked through to the article. There was Sophia's face, makeup-free and tear-stained, sitting across from a sympathetic interviewer. "I want to start by saying there's no excuse for what I did," Sophia's statement read. "Maya Chen was my best friend, and I betrayed her in the worst possible way. Alexander Rothwell pursued me 6 months after he and Maya started dating. He told me that his relationship with her was strategic, that he needed the optics, but that I was the one he truly wanted. I was weak and I was greedy, and I wanted what my best friend had." The interview went on to detail how Alexander had orchestrated their affair, how he'd manipulated both women, how he'd promised Sophia a business opportunity, seed funding for her marketing agency, in exchange for helping him maintain the charade with Maya. "He's a con artist in a bespoke suit," Sophia concluded. "And I enabled him because I thought I'd benefit. But watching Maya walk down that aisle, seeing her discover the truth and still find the strength to stand up for herself, it broke something in me. She deserved better than both of us." Maya read the interview 3 times, her emotions a complicated tangle. She didn't forgive Sophia, might never forgive her. but she understood the seductive power of Alexander's manipulation. He was good at finding vulnerabilities and exploiting them. The interview changed the narrative. Public opinion swung heavily in Maya's favor. The hashtags shifted to Maya the Warrior and Justice for Maya. Brands started reaching out, offering her spokesperson deals. Publishers wanted her to write a book. Documentary filmmakers wanted her story. But the most unexpected contact came from Elizabeth Tanaka herself, heir to the Tanaka Corporation. They met in a private room at an exclusive restaurant, chosen by Elizabeth for its discretion. The young business magnate was elegant and direct, her dark eyes assessing Maya with the sharp intelligence that had built her family's empire. "Ms. Chen," Elizabeth began, "my company was hours away from finalizing a $2 billion merger with Rothwell Industries. Your revelation at the altar cost us time, resources, and exposed us to potential embarrassment for associating with Mr. Rothwell." Maya kept her spine straight. "I'm sorry your business was affected, but I won't apologize for telling the truth." Elizabeth's lips curved into a slight smile. "I wasn't asking for an apology. I was thanking you. Our due diligence team conducted a thorough investigation after your wedding incident. We discovered financial irregularities that would have cost us far more than the initial investment. You saved Tanaka Corporation from a disastrous partnership." She slid a folder across the table. "I've reviewed your academic records and your business proposals, the ones you wrote for your graduate school applications before you met Alexander Rothwell. You have vision, Ms. Chen, raw potential that was clearly wasted on being someone's trophy." Maya opened the folder to find a business proposal for a consulting firm specializing in helping small businesses navigate digital transformation, something she'd written in a late-night burst of ambition 2 years ago. "How did you—" "I'm thorough," Elizabeth said simply. "Ms. Chen, Tanaka Corporation has a venture capital arm. We invest in promising entrepreneurs who demonstrate not just business acumen, but character. What you did at that altar took remarkable courage. The way you've handled the aftermath, refusing to engage in mudslinging, maintaining your dignity, shows emotional intelligence. I'd like to offer you seed funding for your consulting firm. $1 million for 20% equity." Maya's breath caught. That's incredibly generous." "It's business," Elizabeth corrected. "I believe you'll turn that million into 10 within 5 years. But there are conditions. You'll participate in our mentorship program, attend our quarterly business development seminars, and you'll maintain the ethical standards you demonstrated at your wedding. The moment you become what Alexander Rothwell is, the moment you use people as pawns, our partnership ends." Maya's hands shook as she held the folder. "Why would you take a chance on me?" Elizabeth's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because 15 years ago, I was engaged to a man who saw me as a means to access my family's business. I didn't have your courage. I married him, spent 3 miserable years trapped in a loveless partnership, and paid dearly for my silence. When I saw you at that altar speaking your truth, I saw the woman I wish I'd been." She extended her hand. "So, Ms. Chen, do we have a deal?" Maya looked at the contract, at the woman offering her not charity but partnership, at the future suddenly spreading before her like an open road. She thought of Alexander, probably holed up in his penthouse with his lawyers trying to salvage his reputation. She thought of Sophia, living with the consequences of her betrayal. She thought of the girl she'd been, struggling, grieving, vulnerable, and the woman she was becoming. "Yes," Maya said, shaking Elizabeth's hand firmly. "We have a deal." 6 months after the wedding that never was, Maya stood in a converted loft space in downtown Manhattan, watching as workers installed glass partitions and modern desk stations. The exposed brick walls were being repainted in soft gray, and large windows flooded the space with natural light. Above the reception area, metallic letters spelled out, "Phoenix Strategies, building businesses, empowering entrepreneurs." The name had come to her one sleepless night, thinking about transformation and rebirth. She'd risen from the ashes of Alexander's betrayal not as a victim, but as someone stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. "It's coming together," said Marcus Thompson, her newly hired COO and a former classmate from her business school nights. He'd reached out after seeing her story, offering his expertise in operations management. "The tech installation is scheduled for next week, and we have 12 client meetings lined up for the first month." Maya smiled, checking items off her tablet. "What about the scholarship program?" The Phoenix Foundation paperwork is filed. Starting next semester, we'll be offering 5 full scholarships to business students from low-income backgrounds, full tuition, living expenses, and mentorship from our consulting team. It was the part of her new venture that mattered most to Maya, creating opportunities for people like her younger self, those who had the intelligence and drive but not the resources or connections. Alexander had used her background as a prop. She would transform it into a legacy. Her phone buzzed with a calendar reminder. Media interview, Forbes, 2 p.m. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind of strategic decisions. Janet Kim had negotiated a settlement with Alexander that covered Maya's legal fees and provided enough capital to maintain her independence while building the business. Alexander had been desperate to make the scandal disappear, and his lawyers had advised him that paying Maya off was cheaper than the ongoing PR nightmare and the business partnerships that were evaporating daily. Rothwell Industries stock had plummeted 30%. The Tanaka merger was permanently dissolved. 3 board members had resigned, and Alexander's father had forced him to step down as CEO, taking control himself to try to salvage the company's reputation. Alexander had retreated from public life, his social media accounts gone dark, his penthouse rarely showing lights in the windows. Maya told herself she didn't care about his downfall, but sometimes late at night, she wondered if she'd been too harsh. Then she'd remember the text messages, the 18 months of lies and the coldness in his eyes when he'd calculated her worth in terms of stock prices and business mergers. The Forbes journalist arrived precisely at 2, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Reeves who'd built a career on profiling disruptors and innovators. Ms. Chen, thank you for your time, Patricia said as they settled into Maya's temporary office. 6 months ago, you were known as the runaway bride who exposed a billionaire's fraud. Today, you're a funded entrepreneur with a growing consulting firm and a philanthropic foundation. How does it feel to have reclaimed your narrative? Maya considered the question carefully. She'd learned to be cautious with her words, to think strategically about every public statement. I wouldn't say I've reclaimed anything because the narrative was never really mine to begin with. Alexander created a story about who I was, the poor girl saved by the rich man. The media amplified it. What I'm doing now is writing my own story from scratch on my own terms. You've been offered numerous opportunities, reality TV shows, book deals, speaking engagements at 6 figures per appearance. You've turned them all down except for a handful of carefully selected media interviews. Why? Because I'm not interested in being famous for being betrayed, Maya explained. I want to be known for what I build, not what happened to me. Every opportunity I accept, I ask myself, does this serve my mission? Does this help other entrepreneurs? Or does this just keep me trapped in the role of Alexander Rothwell's almost wife? Patricia nodded approvingly. Speaking of Alexander, he's reportedly struggled with depression since the scandal. His company is slowly recovering, but his personal reputation may never fully heal. Do you ever feel guilty about the consequences of your revelation? Maya met her eyes directly. I feel sorry that he made choices that led to those consequences. But I don't feel guilty for telling the truth. He didn't feel guilty when he lied to me for 18 months. He didn't feel guilty when he and my best friend plotted behind my back. He felt entitled to use me as a business tool. The consequences he's facing aren't because of my actions, they're because of his. Fair point. Now let's talk about Phoenix strategies. You're focusing on helping small businesses with digital transformation and sustainable growth. Why that niche? Maya relaxed slightly, more comfortable discussing her work than her past. Because I've lived in that world. Before Alexander, I worked 3 jobs while going to school. I watched small business owners struggle not because they lacked intelligence or work ethic, but because they didn't have access to the kind of strategic consulting that companies like Rothwell Industries could afford. There's this enormous gap between the resources available to major corporations and what's accessible to mom-and-pop shops, local startups, and community businesses. I want to bridge that gap. They talked for another hour about her business model, her partnership with Elizabeth Tanaka, and her vision for the future. Patricia was thorough but fair, and by the end Maya felt she'd represented herself well. As Patricia was packing up her recording equipment, she paused. Off the record, Ms. Chen, do you believe in love anymore? After everything that happened? Maya considered lying, giving some inspirational answer about not letting past pain close her heart, but she'd built her new life on honesty. I don't know, she admitted. I think I believe in partnerships built on transparency. I believe in trust that's earned, not assumed. But romantic love, the kind that makes you vulnerable, that asks you to believe in someone else's goodness without proof, I'm not sure I can do that anymore. Maybe that's Alexander's most lasting damage. Not the public humiliation, but the way he made me doubt my own judgment. Patricia's expression softened. For what it's worth, the judgment that led you to walk down that aisle and expose him instead of just running away. That was sound. You trusted yourself in the moment that mattered most. After Patricia left, Maya stood at the window of her new office looking out at the city. Somewhere in those towers of steel and glass, Alexander was living his diminished life. Sophia had moved to LA, trying to rebuild her career away from the scandal. Elizabeth Tanaka had become an unexpected ally and friend. Janet Kim was now her general counsel. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Client meeting tomorrow confirmed. Harlem Bakery, third generation, wants to expand their online presence. Perfect fit for our model. This was her life now. Real work, real impact, real relationships built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined when Alexander first swept her off her feet. It was better because it was true. As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Maya allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd been broken, betrayed, and humiliated on what should have been the happiest day of her life, and she'd transformed that devastation into purpose. The girl who'd walked down that aisle was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd learned the hard way that the only person who could save her was herself, and she was just getting started. 18 months after the wedding, Maya stood on the rooftop terrace of her consulting firm's new headquarters, a sleek, modern building in Midtown with views of the entire Manhattan skyline. Phoenix Strategies had grown from a dream to a thriving company with 35 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a client list that included everyone from family-owned restaurants to promising tech startups. The evening was crisp and clear, perfect for the celebration Elizabeth Tanaka had organized, a private dinner to commemorate Phoenix Strategies' official Series A funding round. Maya had just closed a $15 million investment that would allow her to expand nationally, launch an accelerator program, and triple the size of her scholarship foundation. Quite a view, Elizabeth said, joining her at the railing. Do you remember when we first met? You were living in that hotel room trying to figure out your next move. Maya smiled. I remember thinking you were taking an enormous risk on someone whose main claim to fame was a viral wedding meltdown. I was taking a calculated risk on someone who demonstrated courage, integrity, and business acumen under extraordinary pressure, Elizabeth corrected. And I've been proven right. Your company's revenue growth is extraordinary. But more than that, you've maintained your values. Every client testimonial mentions not just your strategic expertise, but your genuine investment in their success. They were interrupted by Marcus, who gestured to the growing crowd on the terrace. Boss, people are asking for a speech, Maya laughed. I'm nobody's boss. We're a team. A team that needs to hear from its founder, he countered with a grin. Maya moved to the center of the terrace, where her employees, investors, and a carefully curated group of clients had gathered. She'd learned to be comfortable with these moments, though public speaking still made her nervous. 2 years ago, she began, I stood in front of a very different crowd, on what was supposed to be the most important day of my life. That day didn't go as planned. Knowing laughter rippled through the group. Her story was familiar to everyone present. But that day taught me something crucial, that the life we plan isn't always the life we need. I thought I was lucky to be marrying Alexander Rothwell, to be rescued from my circumstances, to be chosen by someone powerful and wealthy. I thought that was success. She paused, looking at the faces around her. Marcus, who'd left a comfortable corporate job to take a chance on her startup. Jamie, a brilliant analyst she'd hired straight out of community college. Keisha, her head of marketing, who'd left a major firm because she believed in Phoenix's mission. I was wrong. Success isn't being chosen by someone else. It's choosing yourself. It's building something that matters, with people who share your values for reasons that extend beyond profit margins. That's what Phoenix Strategies represents. Not just my second chance, but a commitment to creating opportunities for others who've been overlooked, underestimated, or undervalued. She raised her glass. So thank you. Thank you for believing in this mission. for working tirelessly to serve our clients, and for proving every day that the most sustainable businesses are built on genuine relationships and shared purpose. Here's to Phoenix and to all of us rising from whatever ashes life sends our way." The toast was enthusiastic, the mood celebratory. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself in conversation after conversation, discussing expansion plans, hearing success stories from clients, fielding questions from young entrepreneurs who saw her as an inspiration. She was talking with a prospective client when she noticed a commotion near the elevator. Her assistant, Tony, was having an animated discussion with someone who apparently hadn't been invited. Maya excused herself and walked over. Her heart stopped. Alexander Rothwell stood in a rumpled suit that would have been unthinkable during their relationship. He'd lost weight, his face gaunt and tired. But his eyes, those calculating blue eyes, held something she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse. "Maya," he said quietly, "I'm sorry to crash your party. Tony said you'd be busy all week, and I needed to see you." "You need to leave," Maya said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "This is a private event. I know I have no right to be here, but I've been trying to reach you for months and your assistant keeps telling me you're unavailable." "Because I am. We have nothing to discuss, please." The word seemed to cost him something. 5 minutes. "That's all I'm asking." Maya glanced around. People were starting to notice, to whisper. The last thing she needed was Alexander creating a scene at her company's celebration. 5 minutes. "In my office. And then you leave." They rode the elevator down in silence, the air thick with unspoken history. Maya's office was on the top floor, a space she'd designed herself, with floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and walls decorated with framed letters from scholarship recipients and clients whose businesses she'd helped transform. Alexander stood in the center of the room, looking around with something like wonder. "You've built something remarkable. Why are you here, Alexander?" He turned to face her, and she saw the full extent of his transformation. This wasn't the confident billionaire who'd proposed to her on a private island. This was a man who'd lost everything that mattered to his sense of self. "I've been in therapy," he said. "Real therapy, not just PR-mandated crisis management. For the first time in my life, I've been forced to look at who I am, what I've done, why I do the things I do. And I'm a narcissist. Clinically, diagnostically. My therapist explained how I learned to view people as resources, relationships as transactions. My father raised me to see everything as a negotiation. Everyone is either useful or irrelevant. I'm not making excuses, I made my choices, but I'm trying to understand them so I can be better." Maya crossed her arms. "I'm glad you're getting help, but this isn't my problem to solve anymore. I know that. I'm not here asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm here because I owe you a real apology, one that's not filtered through lawyers or PR teams." He took a deep breath. "Maya, what I did to you was monstrous. I took your genuine feelings, your real love, and I treated them as tools in a business strategy. I let you believe in a future that I never intended to honor. I conspired with your best friend to betray you in the most intimate way possible. And when you exposed me, my first instinct wasn't shame. It was anger that you'd disrupted my plans." He moved to the window, staring out at the city lights. "You humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered to me. You destroyed my company's reputation, cost me billions in deals, forced me to step down from the CEO position I'd spent my life working toward. And you know what the worst part is?" "What?" "You were right to do it. Everything you said about me at that altar was true. I am a con artist in a bespoke suit. I did use you, and you saved yourself in the only way available to you, publicly, because you knew that if you'd just left quietly, my lawyers would have buried you." Maya felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a softening of the rage she'd carried for 2 years. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I've been watching your success from a distance. I've seen your company grow, read articles about your scholarship foundation, heard about your ethical business practices. You took the worst thing I ever did to anyone and transformed it into something meaningful. You didn't let me make you bitter or cynical or cruel. You became better." He turned back to her and she saw tears in his eyes. Real emotion, not the calculated displays she remembered. "And I needed you to know that I see what you've built. I see who you are, and I'm genuinely sorry that I was too broken and selfish to see it when it mattered." They stood in silence, the city sprawling below them. Maya thought about the woman she'd been, walking down that aisle with a heart full of hope and lies. She thought about the rage that had sustained her through those first terrible months. She thought about the choice she'd made to channel that pain into purpose. "Thank you for the apology," she said finally. "It means something to hear it even now. But Alexander, you need to understand. I'm not holding my breath waiting for you to become a better person. I'm not wondering what might have been if you'd loved me for real. I've moved on, completely." "I know," he said. "And that's exactly as it should be. I just needed to say the words, to acknowledge the damage, to tell you that you deserved so much better than what I gave you. I did deserve better, and now I've built better without you." He nodded, moving toward the door. Then he paused. "For what it's worth, Maya, I hope you find someone who sees your worth the way you see it yourself. Someone who chooses you for the right reasons. You deserve that kind of love." "Maybe," Maya said. "Or maybe I've learned that I don't need to be chosen by someone else to be complete. Maybe the most important love is the one I've built for myself." After he left, Maya stood alone in her office for a long moment. She felt lighter somehow, as if Alexander's apology had dissolved the last threads of connection between them. She wasn't healed because he'd said sorry. She'd been healing herself for 2 years. But his words had closed a chapter definitively. She returned to the rooftop where the party continued in full swing. Elizabeth caught her eye and raised an eyebrow in silent question. Maya shook her head slightly. Later, she'd explain. For now, she just wanted to be present in this moment. Marcus approached with a champagne flute and a knowing smile. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Maya said, and she meant it. As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Maya found herself alone on the terrace once more. She looked out at the Manhattan skyline, at the countless lit windows representing countless lives and stories. Somewhere in one of those towers, Alexander was probably returning to his penthouse, to his therapy sessions, to the long process of rebuilding a life based on honesty rather than manipulation. She wished him well in an abstract way, but she no longer needed anything from him. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Phoenix Foundation coordinator. "Just placed our 100th scholarship recipient. A young woman from the Bronx who's starting business school next semester. She wrote in her essay that your story inspired her to believe she could succeed despite her circumstances." Maya smiled, tears pricking her eyes. This was what mattered. Not revenge, not Alexander's downfall, not even her own success, but the ripple effect of choosing courage over comfort, truth over convenience. She thought about that terrified woman in the bridal suite, holding her father's pocket watch and deciding whether to run or fight. She thought about the walk down the aisle, every step an act of reclamation. She thought about the moment she'd said, "I do, not belong to you," and felt the weight of someone else's expectations finally lift. That woman had been brave. This woman, the CEO and founder standing on her company's rooftop terrace, was grateful for that bravery. Maya had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes love is a lie, that sometimes people we trust will betray us, that sometimes the fairy tale is a nightmare in disguise. But she'd also learned that we're not defined by what happens to us. We're defined by what we do next. She'd chosen to rise, to build, to create opportunities for others, to transform pain into purpose, and in doing so, she'd discovered something more valuable than any billionaire's love: self-respect, hard-won and unshakable. As the city sparkled below her and the future stretched ahead full of possibility and promise, Maya Chen raised her glass in a private toast, to the woman she'd been, to the woman she'd become, and to every person who'd ever had to choose themselves when no one else would. She'd said, "I'm done" to a man who saw her as property. Now she was just beginning.